One question I received at the end of this project was, how do we present this in Blender? So before we export it, I am going to just look at our try to, which is basically me texturing it after the fact, kind of a secondary layer just added on top, but we see that adds a little bit more character. We see that the initial wear pretty much impacts this front cylindrical piece a little bit hard, and in a talk with Chip, he suggested that I reduce it a little bit. So we're just going to dial back the roughness changes that we did, but we still keep it in there subtle because I never learn. And something like that will be suitable. So from here, let's open up Blender, and I'm just going to jump to the file that we had before, which is piston06_4. If we go to the high poly layer, we had this decal on it, and this particular decal was from Decal Machine. And if we jump over to the shading, we can just click on this folder in order to copy our path to the clipboard. And then if we just open up a folder in Windows Explorer, we actually have access to that decal. So I'm just going to pop open Substance Painter, and we're just going to drag over the color PNG just into the program. And so we want to specify this as a texture. We want to import it to library because we may want to use it again in the future. It is a very nice decal. So from here, we're just going to click to add a fill layer, and under materials, we will just hit it with a chrome. Let's try that again. Make sure that we're under the right materials. Okay, here we are. So we'll just go with just a really simple chrome will do us, and I'm going to right click and add a black mask. So now there's a black mask on this layer. If we press 4 or 3, we can actually go into projection mode. And from here, we just want to go to our textures. So I'm thinking, which one's our textures? This one's our this is what textures? All right. Never mind, we won't judge it. However, we do have to wait for our thumbnails to load so we can actually see what we're aspiring to grab. And I see a bunch of things in my textures that shouldn't be here, maps and stuff like that. I'll probably need to do a little bit more cleanup post this, but let's see, what was the first letter of this? It was just called color. So let's just look for a color, and that's a lot faster. We drag it over, and we're basically going to be painting this right here. Let's change our perspective to be orthographic for this so that we can just literally get in here and paint our label just so we have it. And we can press 1, go back to just regular looking at it, and at least now we have our decal present on the model inside of Substance Painter. So let's just call this decal, and we could even go back to the material, affect our height, and first enable our height, and we choose to push it out or in, but really that's unrealistic. This will actually do the job, and we can actually call that complete. So just a recap, we added a decal. This is my second attempt at texturing using smarter materials. This was our initial wear that was done over the course of the tutorial, adjusted. And then this is our base texturing that we did just to lay down our initial values before we got in and started making things look progressively more, at least realistic in my opinion. So from here, let's just choose to export our textures, and I'm going to need to specify where we're sharing this. So we're just going to make a new folder, 6_4. I know it's probably tough to keep up with this chronology that I'm using, and we are going to just export this as Substance 3D Stager. Which one do we use? I never know. In fact, we want our file format to be PNG. We can make it 16 bits just to make it a little more interesting, even though it's going to be a little more expensive. Let's choose to export it. And we'll just open that output directory as well, where we have all of our textures present. So let's see if this works out. It's been a while since I've exported out of Substance Painter, so there's a good chance that I did things wrong. So the good thing about this is we have this basic material just set up out of our UV. So we'll just delete all of that, leaving us with just our principle. And because I have Node Wrangler enabled, I can actually first copy to my clipboard and press Control-Shift-T in order to bring up a window allowing me to load up textures. And we'll just go to our right folder, select everything, Principal Texture Setup, and now we've basically imported all of our textures into Blender, where we can press Alt-V and look at things with our wireframe and our textures present. Sometimes it's a little nicer just doing it over on the Blender side of things. But just like that, we now have it able to be presented inside of Blender. So we have our low, we have our high. In fact, let's enable our stage, and we can get in here and just turn off 3D cursors, extras, origins, and I believe that's it. And just like that, we are now looking at our final result. In fact, we can also turn off our floor, grid, X and Y lines, and from here just save our scene because this is now the final version. But one thing I see looking at this is that the normal map did not come through. So let's go back to shading and just double check what we have going on here. And we definitely have our normal present. Let's just disconnect it, just see what it looks like. Wow, it looks a lot different without the normal present for reasons I don't understand. So let us get in and double check these textures that we exported. And which ones are we using? We're using UV normal. Let's try actually using the ones that have DirectX on the end. And we'll change this to be non-color. And now we are looking at our final result. However, on some of these pieces, we may want to enable or disable auto smooth in order to have them display correctly because of the way that we had them over on the Substance Painter side. So we see that once I turn off auto smooth, things are definitely looking a lot closer to how they were looking over in Substance Painter. So with that, we're now able to present our low poly result and allow it to rotate inside of Look Dev and even turn wireframe back on and see it in action just with the wireframe. So that way we can illustrate how low we were able to get with this particular result. But with that, just wanted to show how you would go about sending your textures out and reusing them inside of Blender. If we truly look at this objectively, this is not the intended result. If we look at these edges and we allow this to rotate, the way that it's actually treating this is quite terrible and is nothing like all the work and pain that we went through. So this final level of presentation is completely inadequate because what we're looking at is just inaccurate as heck, and I just can't stand for it anymore. So let us go over to the shading, and we're just going to look at this area, and let's select it, and we have our material, and we want to look at our normal map. So I believe that that's the wrong key. Shift right click drag will create a redirect, and what I'm going to do is just bring in a converter, separate RGB, and we can just move this displacement over. It's not going to matter to us. And we also want to bring in a combine RGB, and we're just going to connect all three channels, which gives us exactly what we were trying to leave off on previously, which was just not going to work. We're going to hit this with an invert, and now we see it looks proper. In fact, if we press M, we can see what it looks like before and after. And coming back and looking at things, we could just press M and see the difference between these normals being displayed properly and these normals being displayed improperly. So one of the differences with Substance Painter that can be tricky at times, especially with the way that I configured it and exported, is that the green channel sometimes will need to be inverted. So since we don't have a control for that, we simply just added one. But we see that, you know, even in the back, this area was completely compromised. And I was just looking at it after the last recording and thinking, man, this thing makes it look like I just destroyed it in Substance Painter, and it shouldn't even look like that. This thing's completely off. In fact, let's look at this area and we see what the difference between having our normals be the correct orientation and them not being the correct orientation is. This whole area just completely compromised and just looks absolutely atrocious. So let's zoom in on a few more areas just so we can compare. This is what we were about to be walking away with, which was just completely unacceptable. And we press M, and this is actually the intended result. In fact, we look at our cylinder, and even our cylinder over here is looking better, but we probably want to give it some auto smooth so that way the shading is at least looking adequate. But if we press M, we see that even with auto smooth being on, the normals were just reversed, giving us an inadequate result. So let's go back to our layout tab now. And if we look at this, this is a proper presentation of our low, sort of. You know, we could Alt VB just to improve what our blank light scenario is looking like, you know, go for something a little bit more flattering for the result that we have in front of us. We could also press Alt VV in order to change our look dev environment to something that's a little more acceptable. May find something that isn't giving us these overtones of blue under the bottom because they're spherical types being used with an rectangular setup, I believe. But maybe something like that. And really just looking at this end piece, which was just looking a little bit strange. Let's take a look at it. And I'm thinking with this piece, maybe it could use a little auto smooth, but we see that auto smooth does not help this shape. So there's something else going on with that, but we could also grab this piece and give it a weighted normal, but weighted normal isn't going to work unless auto smooth is present. So therefore, weighted normal is not even an option in this case. This is just one of those things that we just have to live with and ponder what could have caused that. But for the most part, getting our normals to display properly is the whole reason for us jumping back in and actually dealing with this a second time after initially loading our maps, is because the initial result was just unacceptable. So now we look at this and we now have our final result over in Blender, and we could even enable statistics. And we see that our final result is 3805 on the vertice side, only 3,926 faces, and only 7,041 triangles. But with that, we can truly wrap this up for good. And I thank everyone for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this series. And with that, I will wrap this and see you guys next time.